education, financing, and governance. Edukasyong may pagtatangi sa pagkakapantay-pantay o gender equality and para maisakatuparan ang mga advokasya ng INET, isinasagawa nito ang sumusunod: pakikipag-ugnayan at pakikipagtulungan sa iba't ibang sektor at education and development stakeholders upang magkaroon ng makabuluhan at maunlad na pagbabago.
Good afternoon! Magandang hapon po sa inyong lahat. It's Saturday, March 25, and here we go again. Senior CITI Kwentuhan from 3 to 4 in the afternoon. And this is brought to you by our three co-sponsoring organizations, INET Philippines, particularly its Adult and Learning Education Program, Senior sa panahon ng COVID, and Lapis Siso channel. And your co-hosts, starting with our first episode 4 years ago. I'm Ed de la Torre, and beside me,
Tita Girlie.
yes. Now, excited kami. This is a first for us. We have a first one who will guest for the first time. Secondly, yeah, we will, not really the first, because we had an earlier guest from who lives and works in the States, but from the West Coast. But our guest today will be the first from the, what do you call it, Midwest or? Yes,
Chicago, Midwest
in particular. And it's our first time to meet her too. We met her via Zoom, via chat. Belle Jayco, who's listening in, is a good friend based in Bohol. And last week we had our topic was on social enterprise, and we visited some social enterprises of the Philippine Rural Reconstruction Movement. And she says, "Hey, we should talk about other social enterprises." And even says, "No, in fact, I like to talk about solidarity economy, and make sure if you have time, let's invite Hailey." Oh, really? I said, let's start with her. Let's postpone the others you recommend. And very quickly, we negotiated with Hailey. She says, "Oh my God, you're in Chicago. What time is it there?" And she says, "Oh, it will be 2 a.m. Oh, do you want us to record it earlier and we'll replay it?" I says, "I'm willing to be there at 2 a.m. Oh my God. So I said, thank you very much. And just before this broadcast is being recorded, we asked, are you a night owl or is this struggle to stay up this late? So anyway, thank you very much. Get on. My co-host always, not just Mrs. You're an MC. You should not monopolize the conversation. Our guest should be our main feature. So our very special guest is Hailey, spelling Haily. Quite
Baliktad.
unusual. Hailey Gutierrez. And we will ask her a bit about her life, her background, before we go on to this huge topic of solidarity economy. So welcome, Hailey. Hailey, ano ba?
Hi.
Highly.
Hi, as in Hailey.
Just remember, hi.
Okay. Thank you. Will you please greet our listeners first, and then we'll go on to our conversation.
Okay. Hi. Thank you everyone. Thank you for the invitation, Ate Belle and Tita Ed and Tita Girlie. I was really excited to hear about how Ate Belle kind of suggested that I be here, and I'm excited to engage with everyone and this discussion about social enterprises and how we can root those in values of solidarity and justice. So very, very excited for this conversation, and thank you all for inviting me to be a part of this.
Yes, and well, thank you for making yourself available at such an unholy hour, at least for us here in the Philippines. But I'm glad that you say you're a bit of a night owl. So, but I'm sure by 3 o'clock you should be conking. And
Yeah.
so I'm going to ask you to stay longer. Let's start with by first flashing the slides, the title slides I prepared to guide us a bit, because we don't want our viewers and listeners to just be watching our three faces, but our faces will always be there at the side. So this is the title slide together with the poster. Deliberate yung sinabi kong pwede kaya. Why? Because when I asked Hailey, says, you're okay with Tagalog and English? Says, oh, I might need a bit of a translation in Tagalog. Oh, sige na, we'll do English primarily and we'll do a little Tagalog. So the title is Solidarity Economy and the subtitle is Pwede Kaya. It should be kaya with the glottal stop. Is it possible? But I thought it would be a play also on Tagalog words. Pwede, yes, pwede, can be, but also kaya, can we do it? Something like that within the dominant capitalist system. Anyway, that's the general idea. We'll be going to that soon. But we told the Highly that any guest, even people who we know and our listeners know, but especially someone who will know for the first time, we like to spend a few minutes just non-intrusive, non-intrusive asking. Alam mo naman, mga Pilipino, we tend to ask so many personal questions which normally hindi dapat tinatanong. But we'll just ask her to tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, and why do you call yourself a New Yorker Ilocano? And we'll go through some of your formal training and eventually at some point to say, okay, how did you get into this solidarity economy discussion? So, Hailey, we're listening. Tell us a bit about yourself.
Sure, thanks, Tita. Yeah, so I grew up in New York. My family though is from the Philippines, from Luzon, Tarlac mostly. So we're Ilocano. And I was actually born in Germany. My dad was in the army so that we can get citizenship here. So we came here when I was a toddler, and I grew up in New York. So that's kind of where I am, where my family's from and where I grew up. In terms of education, I was it's I've had a bit of a diverse training. So
Yeah, grabe, oh.
yeah. So my bachelor's was in engineering. I was at Stanford from 2003 to 2007. And then after Stanford, I went to Columbia, New York, studying getting my master's in public health. And then now I'm currently a doctoral student at the University of Illinois in Chicago. So it's kind of all over the place, but I think as we go through how that all came together in the solidarity economy, you might be able to see how all of those experiences and training kind of come together and how they've kind of brought me to the solidarity economy. And then in terms of liberation work or social justice work and community engagement, I've always been involved in like the Filipino community wherever I've been. So in New York, in California, and now currently in Chicago, because I think it's important to kind of remember where we've come from and build community around that. And it also gives us a reason or a focus for our struggles and also for our joy in coming together. The reproductive justice space was my first kind of social justice more radical social justice engagement after grad school. When I was working for pro-choice movements, first in Boston. And then I moved to Chicago and was involved in the violence prevention field, working with community health workers to use a public health approach to reducing violence. And then currently, so I go to school full time, studying critical criminology, but I'm also a full-time deputy research director at an organization called Political Research Associates, where I work with grassroots organizations, social justice organizations, and provide kind of information or intelligence about what's going on in terms of the far right movements, so very, very conservative or supremacist ideologies. What are the threats to social justice movements? So that's what I do during my day job. So that's a little bit about me. Again, like all over the place, like my education, but the root of it is community engagement and social justice and love, to be honest.
Yeah. My gosh. And when we asked Hailin how
Hi.
old you are, and you said, a bit of a millennial, no? So early 30s.
Late 30s, I'm 37.
I feel so old.
No.
I'll turn 80 in July. And one of my
Wow.
favorite quotations is from a Danish existentialist philosopher, Søren Kierkegaard. And he has a very succinct philosophy. He says, life can only be understood backwards. After it's over, you look back, yeah, it makes sense, hindsight. But it must be lived forwards. That's why mistakes are integral to living, because there is no template. I mean, we learn a bit from our past, but the future, if it's no different at all, then what's the point? So there's always something new challenges. And in your case, grabe ano, engineer, West Coast. Public health, East Coast. Midwest, critical criminology.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
where you span the three rough divides of the United States. Grabe.
You know,
Now, but I thank you for that.
sure.
You prepare
Sure,
yourself,
fine.
because Girlie sometimes comes in from elsewhere with questions I cannot even anticipate.
That's good. That's
Just listen
Uh,
and
Well, it's because you're also very much into gender justice. It's Women's Month, so congratulations to all of us. I asked Hailey when we were preparing for this, could you send me a picture that I could use for the poster? And then secondly, could I use your Facebook portrait? She said yes to the second, but to the first, and I want you to explain, no? I forgot now. It might be, is it the first? I no, this one. She sent this picture to me. You sent this picture to me. Why did you send this picture to me to illustrate our topic? What is it about? Could you tell us a bit about this picture? Then we go back to the earlier slide about solidarity economy.
Yeah, so I sent this picture. I just realized I didn't provide any context. So if you could see on the shirt, it says, I don't know if you could read the shirt, but it says, fire the bosses and free the land and elect ourselves and build a new economy.
Oh, wow.
okay.
Mhm.
Okay.
So I think it's a provocative t-shirt, but it's also kind of the foundation for a solidarity economy, whereas we're not going to have just one boss over the whole business, but in a solidarity economy, we are all our own bosses and have autonomy over our time and our labor. We also treat the land as sacred, and we don't, our businesses isn't about profit, but it's about taking care of ourselves and the land. Electing ourselves is referring to self-governance and self-management and trust, instead of putting all that trust and all that power in a few people. And then all that comes together in this building of a new economy, because with those values, we're able to come up with new forms of exchange that's based in sharing and that's based in shared abundance.
Wow.
And so this is a picture of me at so we have a pop-up. So Justice Cream, which I can talk about later.
We'll talk about that later.
Yeah. So Justice Cream is a model of a solidarity economy, and we've been intentional about where we where we distribute our ice cream. And one of these the locations where we have been regularly distributing the ice cream is at this local cafe, which is where this picture is, called Anti-Conquista Cafe. Yeah, and so they're also they have solidarity economy kind of practices. So they're not exactly the same, and that's one of the values of the solidarity economy. Not all businesses have this have to have the same. It's not like one set blueprint, but they are a family-owned and run business that try to reduce the path from the farm workers to the actual distribution in the state. So it's a small local business. They also take care of the land. They don't sell out to Starbucks or any of these big corporations. And they take care of themselves. They don't overwork their farmers. They're not here to make profit. They're here to honor the land, and also to only work as much as they need to take care of themselves.
Which part of the States is this place?
It's in Chicago.
In Chicago.
Yeah.
Because when I scanned your Facebook page, you had a picture of Cuba, and so I thought, Antiquista, is this highly in Havana, or I don't know.
I was in Cuba for school also, actually to study their forms of solidarity over there.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I had a chance to visit Cuba when I was in an informal staff of the Ministry of Agriculture, and they had an exchange program in Cuba. So we went into especially their urban organic agriculture, which they had to go into because when the whole sugar market, import from the Soviet Union collapse and all that. I mean, there was real crisis, and one of the responses was really a lot of organic agriculture, organic farms in Havana itself and in nearby cities. So that was 10 years ago? I forgot now. Anyway, let's go back because I'm glad that it starts with a picture first than a concept. But we have to go back to concept. Sa mga nakikinig po, it's not the lightest topic at 3 o'clock in the afternoon or 2 o'clock in the morning in Chicago. But be patient. We'll try to keep it light, although it's a very serious topic. Let's start with something I lifted from the slides. Oh, and you should talk to us about that. I thought it was slides from you, but it's from is it a Tuesday club or is it Tuesday meeting in Chicago? Anyway, is this from you? Was this is your slide?
Yeah, so I did a similar resource sharing at Tuesday Club.
Yeah. So you can see it, the visuals.
Oh yeah. So this graphic I just found on Google when I just Googled solidarity.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's I didn't make that graphic. That it's beautiful, but I didn't create that. I just thought it was a good representation of what a solidarity economy looks like. And then again on the right, as you can see, the solidarity economy can be broadly conceived as a post-capitalist framework of economic activity that is guided by the needs of humanity and nature. So one of the things that we say in the solidarity economy is that it's an economy where we care more about people and planet over profit.
Yeah.
Mhm.
I was telling you before we started that actually this morning I was invited to Pasig City, no, which is a good local government official, Vico Soto, very young, very progressive. But it was a workshop sponsored by the Freedom from Death Coalition and the Philippine Movement for Climate Justice. And I was invited as a Philippine Rural Reconstruction Movement because we were discussing the whole idea of just transition. You know, you move to
Mhm.
the preferred green economy, but in the process, there will be a lot of displacement and all that. So
Mm.
what can we do? So the whole idea, and that's part of what we will discussing as well, it's not an either or. Everything now is
Yeah.
instantly capitalist, and then at some hope for future, it will be solidarity economy. Meaning, how do we build that within within the womb of the dominant system? So this whole transition is a question really that we all have to address, no? So, but let's go through some of the concepts. Again, I lifted them primarily from your slides, but in the process, you can explain them, but also talk of examples and other things. So we'll go to the next one. There.
Yeah.
Where
So this
does
is
the solidarity economy fit into this large concept, no?
yeah. So this is kind of so where we are now in terms of capitalism. We have social democracy, which is referring to like the like in the States, the democratic socialists, which are still they're Democrats in terms of like electoral politics, but in terms of how power is then distributed and invoked, it's usually it is through capitalist means. And so there's always the incentive and the focus and the priority in electoral social democracy is still for the economy as it is right now. So it's still capitalist. The New Deal and neoliberalism, this is just referring to, so this is very US context. I should have offered a slide that's more global, but the New Deal and neoliberalism is referring to kind of the way that capitalist interests have been fused with state power. And so a lot of the like welfare programs, social services have incorporated like the capitalist interests right now. So they're not really about helping people. They're kind of just like a band-aid for some of the social problems without getting to the root of why poverty exists, which is capitalism. And then in this,
I'd like to interrupt a bit because in the
yeah,
Philippines too, unfortunately, a lot of our technocracy are neoliberal. So ironic,
yeah,
they serve the state, but their framework is really neoliberal. There's always this mantra that, private principles are more efficient and state is inefficient. And of course, they can cite there is corruption, there is mismanagement, there is waste in the public sector. But it doesn't mean then that you swing to the other end and says, well, do it, privatize it or subcontract it, and especially
yeah.
so. So it applies to some extent. We don't have the equivalent even of a New Deal type of capitalism or social democracy type. But it's good that you put it within that framework. So, but
Yeah.
not alternatives. That's the whole debate, no? No, no.
Yeah, and I think that it's interesting. So a lot on like the left, like leftists here also are always criticizing corporations, for example. But it's also not just corporations, like the government has a capitalist agenda, and we can see that in the way that how schools education is designed to align with that agenda. So it's both it's where the power is consolidated, and that's usually corporations, but it's also in the state. So they work hand in hand. And then this post-capitalist vision includes things like, or it has included things like authoritarian state socialism, so things that we've seen in like the USSR, which, as we know, hasn't worked. And so
Or I
that's
might interject
yeah,
because we're in Asia and you talk
yeah,
about China.
China.
Girlie and I listened to Richard Wolff, you know, and he
Mm,
describes China as a combination of
Capital.
state capitalist, state and private capitalist, domestic and foreign, and the
yeah.
whole thing at least dominated, if needed, by the party and the state. So he says, well, they call it socialism with Chinese characteristics. But anyway, in a way, it's a bit different from the classic Russian everything the state, know that. So
Yeah.
we should put that eventually because China is top of the discussion now. What does China represent? It's a critique in a way, you know, geopolitically of the U.S., but it calls itself socialist. Is it? So
Yeah.
but it is definitely authoritarian. So it's another variation, I think, of that one square.
Yeah. And again, it's like it forces an interrogation of where is the power? Where does the power lie, and who's making the decisions about how we do these exchanges with each other and how we meet our own needs? And so we want to get away from that. And so the solidarity economy offers new ways of thinking about how we can meet our needs and engage in these forms of exchange.
Yeah, I like the next slide because you break it down into very specific. What do you cancel and what do you? Ah, no, not yet. It's still the value. Sorry, sorry.
No, you're good. So this is just a summary from different articles about. So a lot of the literature on solidarity economies, they discuss like what are the different values and practices that are involved in manifesting this economy. So these are just some of the concepts that provide the foundation for solidarity economy models. So the first one is mutualism. Co-op. So acknowledging that we're that the economy should work to help people and not markets the way that is right now. And so we meet our material needs and non-material needs by mutual exchange and relationships. It's very focused on relationships and not about markets and profit. And so things like mutual aid is an example of mutualism. Things like alternative currencies, like bartering, or things like that are forms of mutualism. Cooperation. So this is another thing. So instead of competition and self-serving individualism, the solidarity economy focuses on community relations and social cohesion. And really reminds us that we all need each other to survive this world. Sustainability. So in addition to our human relations, we also, in the solidarity economy, cultivate or recover our relationship to the land that's built on, that honors indigenous wisdoms, which teach us how to take care of the land, how to regenerate the land after or as we're using the resources that we do to create our material needs. It treats the lands. It looks at the land as a responsibility versus a piece of property. Democracy, unlike a capitalist economy where there's a divide between workers and owners, or bosses and employees, right? The solidarity economy emphasizes worker ownership and self-management. So again, workers have autonomy over their own time and labor. And then justice. So we reject traditional capitalist models of hierarchy and otherization and domination and conquest. And instead we look at, we have more of a strengths-based approach to the way that we engage with each other. and also we acknowledge that our past is fraught with racism and colonialism, and so how do we kind of heal how do we heal the trauma that we might have been complicit in, or that our ancestors have done to our human brothers and sisters and siblings. So it's both. As we're moving forward, we're going to think about equality and equity and things like that, but also we need to remember that the past is full of injustice, and how do we repair our relationships with one another as we move forward. And then diversity and pluralism. We also acknowledge that different businesses aren't going to have the same exact blueprint or ways of doing things. It's very dependent on people's skills and interests, and also the context that we're in. And so the model is going to change depending on those things, depending on the context, depending on the needs, depending on how our skills evolve. And that's okay, as long as our values are as long as we still honor the values of the solidarity economy.
Yeah, thanks for that. I want to interject again. I was telling you that workshop we had this morning, Professor Rene Ofreneo, who is one of the advocates of just transition, cited former Senator Bobby Tañada. I didn't hear it earlier. He says that Senator Tañada talks of three values that are very related to this. The first one in Filipino is damayan, mutual aid, no?
Yeah.
The unions in the Philippines did not start as union rights vis-a-vis bosses, but first solidarity, help each other. And of course, that got reflected during COVID also, where some of the PRRM women leaders in the rural areas started simply, as you said, with barter. No, they exchanged their vegetables for something else. No, but then they talk now. If it's an enterprise, then you talk of bayanihan, meaning doesn't have to be only the cooperative, but the thing there again, put
Community.
together your resources, your capital, and all that. And then, but he mentioned the third. And when you start, growing, forget this either envy or competition. So then he says, I forgot what the Tagalog, because tangkilikin it's really like patronize or support or the whole idea. So she says maybe that's where those are the three keywords that cover part of your presentation. But the last three here are of course closer to our heart, because we come more from the socio-political tradition, democracy, participation, the transitional justice, meaning coming to terms with the injustice in the past, and how do you make reparation, how do you memorialize. So as I like the last point especially, because people will say, yeah, give us a model. No, there will be different models emerging, and as you said, very context specific also, our history and what. So that brings us to what I thought was the next slide. That one. Okay, you cancel one and something else in its place.
So this is actually from, I didn't make this graphic either. This is from the US Solidarity Economy Network, which I think is also provocative. So instead of capitalism, we have the solidarity economy. And then, so you probably know in the States, we have police brutality is a huge issue. And so this police state, and the US is a police state, and maybe the Philippines is also, but it also talks about, or it also kind of recognizes that our culture is based in punishment, and it's based in punishment and not really accountability. And so transformative justice is part of the solidarity economy, because the police state relies on capitalism and relies on punishment, because once you're able to punish people, and once you're able to marginalize them because of something that they did or something that they're criminalized for, then they're able to use those bodies as labor. So that's why we have the prison system in the US uses a lot of the incarcerated people's bodies to produce a lot of the products that we see in things like Amazon and Costco and
Really?
yeah, and and a lot of the technological parts. So so there's a connection between, and this is why, so that's why I study critical criminology, because I try to unpack the relationship between the prison industrial system and capitalism, because they need each other to survive. And then also monopoly. So it says here monopoly, and so one of the things that the solidarity economy also encourages is localized economies, where, because that's a way that we can decentralize power, right? And so we can prevent a few people from owning so much power, which is a monopoly. So a way to address that is by having community controlled businesses. So instead, and another one, instead of bosses, we have worker owners, right? So and I know this is a lot of the American dream is like people want to become, people want to be CEOs, people want to be directors. But we also, at the same time, I think what it comes down to is that everyone just wants to be free, and everyone wants to have control over their own time and labor. And it's possible to do that, and it's reflected in the way that a lot of co-ops or the values of a co-op operates. So in the solidarity economy, instead of having bosses, we would have worker owners. Instead of having landlords, we would have community land trusts, where land is owned by a collective. And I would even take that a step further. Maybe like the collective can be like can be society, just in general, or giving it back to the indigenous folks to steward the land, but not have it privatized. I think also part of the propaganda of capitalism is those signs that say private property, when they really mean personal property. So a lot in the solidarity economy, you could still have personal property, but things that are needed aren't privatized. So including land.
Yeah, maybe since you mentioned indigenous people, it's legally, there is one instrument in the Philippines where a specific community, indigenous community with a specific area can claim historically, and they serve, and they can acquire what they call a certificate of ancestral domain title. So, and there are a couple of, the challenge afterwards is how to manage and develop it, because then you have either the traditional tribal council. In some cases, they're pretty participatory and open, but in some cases they can become like agents of some multinational who will in a way hire or rent or lease or enter into contract, because it's huge tracts of land, so lend themselves to plantations and all that. So, but at least there is an initial legal instrument that had been since 1993 or 94, I think. So we hope that at least that can be used by the indigenous people. And then the challenge is for their leaders, and especially the younger people, to internalize this notion of we could run this as a solidarity economy model, not reproduce the dominant market system.
Yeah. And part of that means having to unlearn the capitalist way. So and also the colonial way. So like how the laws now are functions of the state, which is a colonial entity. And so just being careful about like the extent to which the law can actually serve indigenous movements, and then also like you said, like if they're agents of the states or agents of capitalists, how can they unlearn, and also how can we unlearn and also learn new ways of creating abundance for a community that isn't reliant on capitalism.
Yeah, actually, I just realized your last point here is tenant unions instead of landlords. We have a
Right
variation
there.
of that is again a
Really?
ambivalent thing, because
Yeah.
there is an agrarian
NHA.
reform law that in theory covers even plantations, no? So you had an experience in the rush just to have the reforms after democratization in the 80s. Uh, Rubber plantations and I think coconut, I'm not sure now. So the agrarian reform beneficiaries, meaning the title is moved from the foreign owner and transferred to the co-op of the agrarian reform beneficiaries.
ARB.
And that's a problem because
Mm.
in a way,
ARBs.
the whole point about internalizing is
Yeah.
a wrong idea. But
Yeah.
if they continue what is run it in the old way, only some of them replace the former
Mhm.
owner, or they subcontract again to a management group,
Yes.
which mismanaged
They
it.
sell their land again.
Oh, or that's the other thing that
That's the
eventually,
problem.
because
ARBs, the ARCs, all of these who benefited from the agrarian reform, they could not sustain their operations, so they started
selling
selling
back.
their rights and their land.
So
So
it's
then they become urban informal settlers.
so it is
Mm.
we have a bit of,
It's 30
you might
years.
call it enough some lessons to learn from what we feel is important. That is now, how do we help form, develop this, not only the consciousness, the ideas, but also the capacities.
How
Yeah.
there's this people's plan and
Yeah.
initiative where all the informal settlements can be handled by organized communities, and they are entitled to a budget of something like 5 billion a year to build their own settlements,
Housing, their own
their
housing.
own houses, their own walkways, whatever infrastructure is necessary. But with the changes of administration, those kinds of initiatives get lost in the fray of who's in charge now of the
Yeah.
housing. It's called the National Housing, but now it's the Department of Settlements.
Yeah,
No,
but there
changing.
are still components that are there. I mean, it's like it's been stifled,
Yeah.
but it's there.
Mm.
And again, we have to use every instrument we have, and there are still certain laws and policies that, in a sense, was an attempt of those in power to accommodate what they realize
Yeah.
is a valid desire and demand. So that's, I just wanted to mention that because at least from the Philippine context, no. But the
Yeah.
participatory democracy, you don't have to convince us about that.
That
We have to do that.
Yeah, participatory democracy, local democracy.
Yeah.
One of the things that because as you go up in, I guess it's hard to get a lot of people on board with certain values, right? And it's hard to build relationships with people, with a group of people as it gets larger and larger.
Yes.
And so it's easier to build relationships and trust and community agreements smaller. So that's why we promote more localized everything, right? And this is also like credit unions, community land trusts, tenant unions. That's part of the just transition, right? So it's not like a perfect. They're not perfect systems, but they're in the tension between what we have now and what we're moving towards.
Girlie's already whispering to me, says, let's move on. Anyway, there are still some concepts that we will go through, but we'll go back to this later because there's the whole diversity. There are enterprises and enterprises. It's not just, but because you wouldn't realize it highly,
Mhm.
we're already 43 minutes into our 1 hour.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So it's so
I don't-
interesting. But we won't let
We don't
this
want a lecture.
yeah, get back first to
This is a just
that is
translation.
the theory. That's the theory after the I got this from Facebook page and from the page of Just Ice Cream.
Just to scream.
We have to let
Justice
highly talk about that because first of all,
cream.
we are both ice cream addicts. So tell us
No,
something
we're
about
not addicts. We're
not addicts, just what?
enthusiasts.
Enthusiasts. Just as a case study of wow, how did you think of it and how is it going?
Yeah, so I guess it started off as like a joke. So my first job ever when I was 14 was working at an ice cream shop. That was my first job. And so I've always been an ice cream enthusiast as well. And that kind of became probably part of what I was known for, like I was always associated with ice cream. And so in 2016, with a lot of the increased attention on and documentation of police brutality, that was kind of the context where this also came about. So I was hearing a lot and seeing a lot of my friends being affected by police brutality. And then a friend at the time in 2016 was making ice cream. He's a chemist and he was making ice cream with an after school program. And then I was like, oh, it'd be cool. If you, instead of, you can like monetize that, but then all of the money can go back to the after school program. And then he was like, I'm too busy for that. So I was just like, okay, well, I'm gonna go ahead and do that. And then it was kind of like a pet project for a while, and I got really busy with school and with work. And so it was kind of on the back burner for a little bit. But then I got accepted to this fellowship, a civic engagement fellowship, which required a capstone. And so I was like, this is a good opportunity maybe to bring this to life. And so they connected me with a lot of people and resources to launch Justice Cream. And so it originally started as a fundraising tool. So still within the capitalist framework. But people were like, oh, but it's like mutual aid because you're giving all of the profits to these communities. But then I was like, but that's kind of a charity mindset also. And then someone reached out and was like, this actually reminds me of, have you heard of the solidarity economy? This kind of reminds me of something that the solidarity economy would do. And so they were a student, they were a classmate. And then they said, and the university has a class on solidarity economies. So then I reached out to the professor of the class, Stacy Sutton, and she was kind enough to do an independent study with me over the summer and really mentored me and taught, guided me through all these readings. And now she's on the board of Justice Cream. So that's where I began to learn more about the different the practices and how this can apply to Justice Cream. So then we morphed from being just a fundraising tool to becoming a model of solidarity economy. That's like so we're actually a nonprofit cooperative. So we're not just a cooperative that where all the funding goes to us, but we also have funding streams from foundations and donations, and then we disperse all of those to the community. So I think that's also like a critique of, by doing that, we're also critiquing or offering a new model for cooperatives that some of them are struggling to be sustainable, and also are starting to adopt like capitalist practices. And so we're trying to kind of push back against that and consider new ways of how we fund ourselves and how we be sustainable, and also how do we tell a story that that can promote solidarity and mutualism.
Yeah,
So
I just scrolled through the webpage of Justice Cream, so I couldn't pick enough from there. I just say I'll get the team, which are all avatars, and then
yeah.
let you tell the story. Uh, but
Yeah.
it's in Chicago or
Mhm. Yeah, so
okay.
it's in Chicago, and right now we're in the process. So we're at Anticonquista until
Yeah.
the end of the month, and then we're going to be at a South Side location, a vegan location, um, um, and we're building that out currently, and then we're also looking to purchase a building that'll be the start of a community land trust. So it'll be a coalition-led building and coalition-owned building where we'll have like an education, like a school that teaches solidarity economy. It'll also have like an incubator for cooperatives,
Mhm.
community health clinic, also like a museum for different social movements so that we can honor our legacies and
Mhm.
see where the connections are, and also an indigenous-led garden.
Yeah.
That's
I
nice.
let me flash the
Appreciate.
which I picked up also from the website. I think it's a graphic presentation of your understanding of solidarity economy related to extractive and regenerative economy, which brings us the whole idea also of sustainability, no? Uh, it's
Mm.
it's nice. It's graphic.
This
It's
is from the Just Transition framework, actually. So
yeah, it is.
yeah,
Yeah.
so I can't take credit for this, but
Well,
yeah, so this is yeah, I thought this is a helpful. So this is where we are now, where a lot of our power is consolidated through colonialism, conquest, extraction, exploitation, and consumerism, um, and then enforced through militarism. And the purpose is for enclosure of wealth and power, right? And so we want to move away from that and towards this culture of caring and sacredness, where instead of extracting from the world, we can still borrow resources from the world, natural resources, but we also have to give back, right? Work is based in cooperation instead of exploitation and hierarchy. Governance is based on deep democracy and consent and trust instead of force and militarism. And then the purpose is caring for both people and planet.
I like the way you co-opt you you put the whole idea of they talk now in the years about the deep state, that the politicians come and go, but the deep state is there. I think the same thing with forms of democracy, the representative
Mm,
party, but deep democracy means make sure that the agency of not just the individuals but especially the local communities remain
yeah,
alive and central. And again, it's a vision, it's a wish, it's a process. The reality is quite far from them. But as you say, uh, it's at the scale of the local that there is a greater
Mhm.
chance of achieving at least some approximation of it. No,
Mm,
philosophically, I believe in what I call successive approximations of the ideal.
yeah.
So this is a just transition framework. I should pass it
Mm,
on to the people who invited me earlier. No? But
yeah,
the question I want to raise two things. I mean, other than how do you thrive, or not just survive, but thrive within a dominant system.
yeah.
Also, how do you grow? Because
Mm,
any enterprise under whatever name must grow. Otherwise, it shrinks. There is rarely a completely stable at one scale type of enterprise. No? And
yeah.
it's how do you not fall to the trap of growth by all costs, by all means, as fast as possible. But at the same time, steady, sustainable. I mean, talking of your plans for Justice Cream, I said, oh, they have some plans and also diversify into various engagement, no?
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah, so in terms of how are we thriving, it was like it was difficult, to be honest, and it still is. And so one of the things that I also want to say about the folks in Justice Cream is that we all have like a certain level of privilege, right? So we're able to do, a lot of us are graduate students. We're document we're documented immigrants. We have legal immigration status, education. So we all have some kind of class privilege that we're able to lean on. And we all have actual full-time jobs. So we've been doing this on a volunteer basis. And so that's how we've been able to like survive, by being able to straddle both worlds. And that's what the just transition is, right? We acknowledge that we're going to be in this tension for a while. But because of our positionality, we're able to be in both worlds,
Yeah.
while we're shifting things. And in terms of growth, so one of the things that we say at Justice Cream is we're not here to maximize profit, we're here to maximize justice. So we're about, and another thing that we say in the solidarity economy is we're not here about scale, we're not here to scale up, we're here to scale deep. And so we've been getting a lot of requests to like distribute at Walmart, or to sell out, basically to sell out to Walmart, to sell out to Whole Foods, to sell out to the different large food stores, food chains. Yeah. But that's anti our values. And so we come into a lot of those conversations, and a lot of those, and as a team, whenever we have to make a decision, we always go back to our values to make sure that they're aligned. And if it's not aligned, then we have no problem saying no. We've also turned down funding. We've turned down hundreds of thousands of dollars in funding because the source wasn't something that was aligned with our values. But at the same time, even though we say no to certain things, something, I don't know if it's like the universe or something magical happens where another opportunity comes for even more money, for even more support. And so that's kind of how we've been able to thrive and grow. And so I think as people see that you're committed to your values, it attracts more of the people that you want to work with and that you want to grow with. And then also in terms of like, I know a lot of like nonprofits and businesses are all about growth, but I think it's also about like evolving. And so maybe Justice Cream isn't going to be Justice Cream forever. Maybe it's going to be something different. So like you said, it's not going to be like a static. We're not going to be static. We're also going to be, we take pride in being fluid and being responsive to context and needs. And as the needs grow, then we're going to grow. And as needs change, then we're going to change. So that's kind of how we move through this world. But yeah, we've been getting a lot of support because I think people are really attracted to the hope that we offer. And so like for social enterprises, like one of the things that I would advise is that to integrate a mission to the organization that resonates with people. And I think everybody in this world wants positive change. And so that can be something that you can incorporate, something that's personal to you.
Well, that actually is a good segue to our winding up few minutes. Normally, we ask this of senior people to look back in their lives and whether they have learned something that they want to leave behind.
Going forward.
You're going what our daughter calls senior millennial, but senior. So you have a right to look back a bit and say, not final, not fixed, not prescriptive. A few lessons, including the last one you said, hey, have a sense of mission that you can project because that will attract people who like that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
But I mean,
Mhm.
as a person with your so many interests,
Yes.
what's your message, your reflection as we wind up this all too short 1 hour Zoom meeting? And on your
Let me
end at
ask.
3 o'clock in the morning. Yes.
Oh, tita.
With all your concerns and advocacies and your commitment to deep democracy, don't you have time for love and family?
Yeah. I tell you, Girlie always raises it.
I do. So I'm married.
Okay.
I am married, yeah, for the past 2 years. So,
Okay.
and that's part, honestly, I think being in this space has also helped cultivate better relationships. So, and that's something that if you can't cultivate love and democracy at home, then you're gonna have trouble cultivating love and democracy um, with your community or with your business, right? And so you have to practice what you preach, I guess, when you're doing your work. Mhm.
Okay, thank you, Girlie, for that. But one more. Any other last point you want to say? I forgot. I want to mention this. Any just thoughts?
Yeah, I think also like part of being in like starting a business um or starting any like initiative, so social enterprise, cooperative, you're gonna be it's gonna be challenging. And so you want to, one of the things when you're building your team is being intentional about who you're willing to struggle with, and who you can trust. But it's also about um, incorporating like activities that'll help grow that trust with the organization. And so I think having community agreements and having very specific values is foundational before, and they have to be co-created with your team, right? You can't just go in and say, okay, I want my business to have deep democracy. I want my business to have cooperation. Yeah, it has to be you have to co-create those with your teammates. But I think having that as a starting point is really important because you're going to be having to make a lot of a lot of difficult decisions, and you'll need your values to guide you as you're making those decisions. So
Yes. That's it's like we have a saying in the Education for Life Foundation, hango sa buhay, drawn from a deep well of life. Spoke someone who has not only reflected on life, but also on this whole process of it's difficult building democracy, developing trust, forging
yeah.
agreements, reviewing them, correcting mistakes, and then doing it again. So, well, thanks for that, Hailey. It's been a pleasure being with
Yeah,
you.
you too.
And well, thank you for sacrificing your dawn.
It's okay.
One last
Oh
question.
my God.
Tita.
Do your parents look at your commitments now?
I think they're confused a lot of the time. But they're
Yeah.
very supportive. They're very supportive of everything. I think when we came here to the States, they always wanted me and my sisters to be successful by the standards of the American dream. But then ultimately they recognize that they would rather us be happy and passionate about what we're about. So I have one sister that works for she works in the capitalist space, but she's now she's a socialist because she moved to Scotland. And she's kind of exploring social justice over there. My youngest sister, I'm the eldest. The youngest sister is she's in like the arts space. She's a really nice singer. And then there's me. And so yeah, they made three very different girls and they're supportive of us all. So
Yeah.
I think, and that is a huge privilege, I think, that has, enabled me to do this and to take these risks as I have. So.
Okay.
Thank
Thanks
you.
for that. And before Girlie thinks of another question, I think we better wind up this conversation. No.
Well from you, Heidi.
Yes, and perfect theme for Women's Month.
Yeah, and I hope
How
most
parents
of my
should,
nephews and nieces who are also there in the US will turn out to have your values and your commitments.
So thank you, Hailey.
Thank
And
you.
we wind up our Senior City Kwentuhan at this
Yeah.
point. Belle, thanks for listening silently there. Again, we like to thank our co-sponsors, Education Network, especially Adult Learning and Education Program, Senior sa Panahon ng COVID, and Lapis CISO Channel. And special thanks to our guest techie. We usually have Cass, but today is not available. So ano ba? JM, and I thought JM was because of the initial was a boy. It's Joanna Marie. So JM, maraming salamat for she's the one who takes care that this is simultaneous livecast in other FB chats, no? So thank you again. This has been very interesting,
Thank you
stimulating,
both.
and senior citizens like ours make talking to people like you make us believe that
Thanks, Ed.
there
Thanks,
is
Girlie. Thanks,
there
Sally.
is evolution
Thanks,
and next
everyone.
generation will always have better ideas, but shared with what we have committed to also. Thank you very much, Hailey.
Dom spiro spero.
Oh my God, that's the Latin I thought. Dum spiro spero is while I breathe, I hope.
Oh, I love that.
Okay, bye-bye. Thank you very much.
Bye. Good night.